Yo, it's Kim and it's 2018 and I can't believe there are hardly any videos comparing the Panasonic 20mm 1.7 versus the Olympus 17mm 1.8. These were two of the OG wider standard prime lenses on the system for a long time and they deserve their due. So sit back, relax, today we're doing a prime versus prime with a new intro. Since these two lenses are similar in focal length, someone in the market for a wider standard prime is probably having a look at both of them. So I figured while I have both of these lenses in, why not have a bit of fun and help them out. Today we're going to be looking at technical aspects, some not so technical, and ultimately find out which lens is right for you. Now to simplify things, I've divided the review into two umbrella factors, that's image quality and usability. Once you get to a certain level of sharpness, you start to experience diminishing returns. In summary, the 20mm is sharper than the 17mm, but I'm not going to be on Instagram zooming in on people's pictures, nor am I going to be watching a video, enjoying it, and pausing it to be checking out the sharpness. At some point, the sharpness is just there or it isn't. The 20mm is the sharper of the two, but the 17mm is definitely sharp enough for my uses. In these shots, it's obvious that the 20mm is sharper when you pixel peep. You can see this in the level of detail from the car park. The Olympus just doesn't capture as much detail. Now in terms of saturation, the Panasonic definitely has more saturated colors. In my experience, Panasonic lenses tend to have more saturated colors than Olympus lenses, at least when you have them on Panasonic bodies. You can see that in the yellow center, where the 17mm has a less saturated yellow. Panasonic has more contrast. You can see this from the way the yellow is rendered in the flower. It just has more gradations, whereas the yellow areas from the Olympus seem more flat. You can also see this in the shadows where the 20mm image just feels more alive. Moving on to bokeh, the Panasonic will have more blurred backgrounds. That's partly because of the slightly longer focal length and the slightly wider aperture. But the thing about bokeh is it's not about how blurred the background can be. It's about how well the lens can do that. And that can be pretty subjective. In this picture, the 17mm to me has a creamier out of focus area, while the bokeh balls are more consistently round, even at the edges. But in the shot outdoors, the out of focus area for the 20mm is definitely smoother, and mixed with the more saturated colors, subjectively looks better. Now in this shot of the flowers, the 20mm is definitely more blurred, but I personally like the way the 17mm renders the background. It's hard to explain, it just feels less clinical and more natural to me. Now moving on to usability, here's the point I'm probably trying to make. Image quality is only one aspect of the buying decision. How usable a lens is usually the difference between having to sell it or keeping it. Now starting us off with focal length, the 17mm is about a 35mm focal length in full frame terms, and the 20mm is about 40mm in full frame terms. The 20mm is slightly narrower, so just keep this in mind if this is going to be the widest lens in your arsenal. This is easy, neither of them have it, don't know why I mentioned it. Boring technical stuff again, you're not going to see a noticeable difference between an f1.7 and an f1.8. You won't be at dinner with your friends wishing you bought the Panasonic over the Olympus because of the low light capability. Now in terms of autofocus for video, both of them are slow because it's more dependent on the camera body, but the 20mm is noisy whereas the 17mm is not. Now for stills, the 17mm wins hands down. If you've ever shot with the kit lens on the Lumix G7 or any of the newer Micro Four Thirds lenses, that's about how fast it focuses. For the 20mm, it likes to take its time, if you know what I mean. At the end of the day, this is what pushed me to go with the Olympus. More on that later. The focus by wire on the 20mm is hard to use. First of all, the speed which it racks is unpredictable because the lens is very short, the focus ring is also very thin, so overall, it's really hard to use. The Olympus, on the other hand, is more predictable when you turn the focus ring, but with the focus clutch feature, it becomes even more reliable. I don't really use the focus clutch for stills, but I do occasionally use it for video. Now these lenses are wider standard primes, so I wouldn't be shooting macro shots with them anyway, but just for the heck of it, the Panasonic has a closer focusing distance of 20 centimeters versus the 17mm 25mm minimum focusing distance. Gosh, that was confusing. Anyway, the Panasonic wins in this aspect because of the shorter minimum focusing distance and the slightly longer focal length. Now in terms of form factor, the Panasonic is lighter. I wouldn't say it's a big difference, but I definitely feel it. In terms of size, which is important for street photography or anytime you don't want to draw too much attention, both of them are tiny to begin with, but the 20mm is just that much smaller and lighter and less conspicuous. In terms of aesthetics, the Panasonic looks good. It's got a nice classic look, it's compact with a solid build. The attention to detail, like making the outer rim of the front element shiny, just makes this lens look so good. It's mostly made of plastic, so it's lighter, but it doesn't feel cheap. But man, does the 17mm look good too. It's also got a retro look, the depth of field markings are on point, and for a small lens, this thing feels substantial. The Panasonic is significantly cheaper than the Olympus, like 60% of the price of the 17mm. That's substantial, but as always, the price of a lens and whether it's worth it or not is often very subjective and a very personal decision. So wrapping this up, what it comes down to is how you use your lenses. For me, these lenses were always all about environmental portraiture and street photography, which means I mainly shoot people and I shoot candid. Put two of those things together and you need a fast focusing lens. In short, I literally cannot do my job with a slow focusing lens. I thought I could. I tried everything from using manual focus to smaller apertures, but I just couldn't make it work. The Olympus does the job for me, and that's why I'm keeping it and selling the Panasonic, even though technically the Panasonic has better image quality. So if you're looking for a super sharp standard prime lens and want to get the best bang for your buck, and you aren't concerned about autofocus speed, get the Panasonic. It's a no-brainer, it's an amazing lens for the price. The only questions you'll need to ask yourself are, will the slightly tighter focal length matter to you? And will the slower autofocus speed bother you? Make sure to think about that last one for a while. Now, if you're concerned about autofocus speed and can afford it, go with the 17mm. It isn't quite as sharp as the Panasonic, but it's also got great image quality, and the faster autofocus speed makes it more usable for things like street photography, where fast focusing is desirable. In all honesty, this lens could look like a used garbage bag and I'd still use it. It's got just the right focal length, and the autofocus speed is fast and accurate. In short, it's what I need for my workflow, and that's why I'm keeping it. I hope this video showed you the thought process I go through when buying gear and how image quality is in everything. Because screw a Ferrari if you're driving off-road, just saying. Both these lenses have great image quality, but I chose the 17mm for the faster autofocus speed because I have a passion for candid shots and my work relies on it. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great week.